Hantavirus are actually the rodent-borne viruses. These are RNA viruses that are carried by rodents, and rodents are their natural reservoir hosts, which means that when a rodent gets infection, it doesn't get any severe disease, and the rodents don't die because of the hantavirus infection. They rather keep the virus, lower levels of the virus in their body, and they keep shedding the virus in the environment, either through feces or through urination. In comparison to that, when humans get the infection, it causes a very deadly disease. So humans either die because of the hantavirus infection, or they can recover and heal and eliminate the virus from their body and live free of virus in their life. I was very much interested in the virology from the very beginning, because viruses themselves are unique form of life. When the viruses are alone, they don't multiply, but once they come in contact with a permissive cell line, they multiply rapidly and build the load. And they have a very small genome. Hantaviruses have just 3 proteins in their genome, and they infect our cells, and they invade our multi-layer antiviral defense systems, evade that antiviral defense system, multiply and build the load, and sometimes kill the host. This is something very interesting that got me engaged, got me interested in the virology. But in hantaviruses, I got interested because of the severe disease, and there is no treatment at present, no vaccine, no antiviral therapeutic available for hantaviruses. And I have been studying hantaviruses from almost 20 years now, out of them 10 years here in Western University of Health Sciences. And we have, our team has significantly contributed to the hantavirus biology. And we have been studying hantaviruses in different aspects. One of our aspects in our lab is pretty much focused on the basic virology. We are trying to understand that how hantaviruses establish infection in the host cell. We are trying to understand that molecular crosstalk between host factors and the viral proteins inside the cell during the course of infection. The goal of this basic research program is to identify novel therapeutic targets for therapeutic intervention. Then we take these targets to the second aspect of our research program, which is pretty much focused on antiviral drug design, where we use these targets and try to identify therapeutic molecule. For hantaviruses, we found that its nucleocapsid protein is a novel therapeutic target, and then we developed an antiviral drug against it. We are trying to develop an antiviral drug, and the effort was actually funded by National Institute of Health. To make a long story short, we screened a very huge chemical library of 108,000 chemical compounds. And right now we have some few lead inhibitors that shut down the virus replication in the host cell. And we have patented these molecules. And currently we are working to take these molecules to the next level of development in the drug development pipeline. And we hope that one day these molecules will be available for the clinical use and will be easily accessible to the hantavirus patients. When it comes to the hantavirus spread, the spread happens at multiple levels. One is the spread between the rodents, rodent to rodent. And then there is the spread from rodent to humans and human to human spread, human to human transmission. Let's talk about the rodent to rodent spread. When a rodent is infected, it contains virus pretty much all over in its body, especially in the body fluids. Let us say a rodent is taking food somewhere, and then the food gets contaminated through the saliva. And the leftover food, if it is eaten by another rodent, then that rodent can get the hantavirus infection. Also, the rodents sometimes engage in in fights with each other, and they can scratch and transmit the virus from one rodent to another rodent. But transmission to humans is a little different. The virus which is present in the excreta of the rodents, which are feces or urine droppings, if they get aerosolized somehow and humans inhale those aerosols, they can get the hantavirus infection. But human to human transmission is a little different. Let's say there is a person who has hantavirus infection, and that person sneezes and the virus comes out in the sneeze somewhere. And then there is another person who touches that screen, that nasal secretion, without washing the hand. If that person touches his nose, he can get the hantavirus infection. So basically, another person to get the hantavirus infection, he must get in contact with the contaminated body fluids, which includes nasal secretions, saliva, or a contaminated blood samples, for example. Well, so far as the hantavirus are concerned, hantaviruses usually do not spread from human to human. There is only one hantavirus species that's known to spread among humans. That's called Aedes virus. And that Aedes virus is actually present in South America, in Argentina. And right now, in this outbreak in the cruise ship, unfortunately, the same Aedes virus, hantavirus species is present there. But all other hantaviruses, sin nombre virus, which we find here in the United States, especially in the New Mexico area, or other, a lot of hantaviruses are known there, they don't spread from human to human. The virus has been present in the United States for quite some time. And usually we don't hear about the hantavirus outbreaks quite often because they don't happen. There are sporadic outbreaks sometimes which are pretty much zoonotic origin. So it's not a pretty common, but we have seen this infection around for a long time. Yeah, one of the important misconceptions this time is that, especially in the social media, I see that people are worried that, oh, are we headed to a new COVID-like pandemic? The short answer is no, because let me tell you how. Hantavirus and SARS-CoV-2 are two different viruses. SARS-CoV-2 is a virus that is a pandemic potential. On the other hand, hantaviruses do not have pandemic potential. What pandemic potential means, a virus has to have different properties to meet that criteria of pandemic potential. One is how quickly it spreads from human to human. If we remember, COVID-19 pandemic, SARS-CoV-2 infection was pretty much airborne disease. A person who is infected with SARS-CoV-2 virus, if he sneezes, the small tiny droplets contain the infectious virus. And those droplets remain in the air for a long time and can travel to far off places and cause infection. This is real blast, and it is a very rapid way of spreading the virus in the environment. In compared to that, if you take hantaviruses, somebody has to really come in contact with the contaminated body fluids. That rarely happens. As I said, somebody has to touch the nasal secretion of an infected patient, then touch the nose without washing the hands. And another important thing, yesterday in the news, I saw somebody, saying that, well, hantaviruses, for human-to-human transmission, you don't need to be really in close contact with the patient. That is true. He actually gave an example saying that one of the hantavirus-infected patients once went in a party, and in that party, a lot of people got infected. They never met this person at all. So that's quite possible, because if there is a hantavirus infected patient, he touches the different surfaces, or his nasal secretions or body fluids fall around, then the person can leave. Somebody else touching the same surface will come in contact with the body fluids that have the virus, and then it can spread. So basic thing is that the hantaviruses, the transmission is very slow and it rarely happens, and you need to really come in contact with the body fluid. But SARS-CoV-2, on the other hand, it's an airborne illness. So that's a very big blast. It spreads very rapidly. So we should not be worried that we are headed to a COVID-like pandemic. A lot of people have this misconception that all rodents out there are infected with the hantaviruses. That's not really true. A particular hantavirus species had a particular rodent. If we take here, for example, here in the United States, in New Mexico, we see a virus called sin nombre virus. That is carried by deer mice. There is not any other rodent that will carry the sin nombre virus. But there are, other rodents that have been found, but pretty much widely accepted rodent that carries the hantavirus are rats and mice. For hantaviruses, the important thing is that the good idea is that try to stay away from the rodents. Or if you know some areas that have rodent infestation and there have been reports about the hantavirus outbreaks in those areas, try to be away from those areas. Or if you ever come in contact with the rodent droppings or the patient who has hantavirus infection, you have to be very careful because the virus is very deadly. So the precautions you can take is, at least you have to put the mask on, and you have to wear the gown, and you have to put the gloves on if you are ever handling these samples or going close to these patients. And once you are done, then you have to pretty much wash your hands with the soap, and at least soap should stay on your hands for 30 seconds. Or you can use other alcoholic solutions like alcohol swabs to clean. So these are some important measures somebody can take. But the good idea is to pretty much remain away from those patients that are infected, because the disease is deadly. Although it transmits very slowly, but if somebody gets the hantavirus infection, there is 40% mortality or the death rate of this hantavirus disease. So far as the hantavirus are concerned, I mean, people are pretty much worried about the death rate of the hantavirus-induced disease. The disease we see here in North America is called a Hantavirus cardiopulmonary disease. It is caused by the sin nombre virus, in which the lungs and the heart get involved, and the mortality rate is 40%. That's a too much of death rate. In Asia and Europe, we see the disease that has little bit less mortality. That's called hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome. It involves kidneys. So it is the death rate actually that is very much concerning, and people are still working to have either a vaccine or an antiviral drug. There are a lot of different other areas in the hantavirus research people are still working on. For example, how does the some people are focusing on the rodents, and what if the hantavirus undergoes too much mutations and causes host shifting and spreads to a lot of other rodents? It is going to create an environment in which people, humans pretty much probably cannot live. It will be pretty much dangerous. And sometimes the hantavirus persistence in the environment, and when the rodent shed the virus in their feces, these feces, if they are present in small crevices where there is less ventilation and the temperature is relatively cooler, the virus can stay in the environment for a longer period of time. It may vary from weeks to several months. And another important area is for hantavirus is that when they cause the infection to the host, they hide for they get a narrow window of time in which they hide, and the host doesn't know whether they are infected with hantavirus. This is called, they shut down the type 1 interferon response, and the body does not know that there is virus infection. Then the viral load builds up, and then when the host comes to know that I'm under infection, it mounts a very vigorous immune response, and that brings the cytokine storm in some people. And that cytokine storm ultimately becomes very deadly for some people, but not for some other people whose immune response is under control. People are still trying to understand the mechanism under these different areas. If we know exactly why some people mount a very vigorous immune response, or why hantavirus shut down the type of interferon response, this may give us to different targets against which drugs can be developed in the long run. And also, there is no vaccine, no drug right now for these hantaviruses. So these are different areas that still need a lot of work by the scientists. In the news outlets, I see some news channels like CNN. They invite the people who are experts in the area. They give correct information, but in a lot of social media posts, I see people sometimes spreading the information which is not accurate. For example, some people say, well, hantavirus is pretty much in all the rodents, which is not true. Or people getting worried that, oh, are we headed to a pandemic-like situation like COVID? That's not accurate. And so we have to be careful about such kind of news outlets there, and make sure that the information is correct and get it verified from the expert, because sometimes they may spread the incorrect information. If you remember COVID-19 pandemic, there was a misinformation out there that vaccines are not good, and then what happened? A lot of people died because they did not take the vaccine. And in the early stages of that pandemic, some people started taking the drugs that have nothing to do with the coronaviruses. So information has to be given by the experts in that area, and other people may spread the misinformation that can cause damage rather than give any benefit to the people out there. I am highly motivated to keep working on the hantaviruses. My motivational factor is the lack of the antiviral therapeutic. And this is my area in which I have been working for many years. And I'm highly interested and curious to see either a vaccine or an antiviral drug out there that can save lives. Although there are not many outbreaks of hantaviruses there, but the disease is very deadly. So you need something out there for the general public. And these World Health Organizations should foster collaboration among scientists so that they can quickly come up something like an antiviral therapeutic or a vaccine. These researchers that are working in different areas, if they collaborate each other, that can really help to generate something meaningful, because there are experts who are working in, working with, for example, with the host, natural host like rats, mice, or the zoonotic animals that have the virus. Some people work how it is transmitted, and there is some other teams that are specifically focused on antiviral drug development, some on vaccines. If they collaborate with each other, and that will really help to bring the science very close and help them to succeed in their individual missions, what they are doing. Right now, I thought that, well, it is very important that we let the people know that although there is the outbreak there in the ship, that we are not headed to hopefully not headed to a very deadly pandemic like COVID-19. Don't bother the habitats of the rodents and let them stay where they are. And actually, the urbanization, human urbanization, has caused a lot of problem. They destroyed their habitats. As a result, these rodents started coming close to the urban areas and brought the virus close to the human populations. Otherwise, if they stay far away, there will be hardly ever emergence of the hantavirus disease among humans. So it is just because either people are going out there hiking in the mountains and disturbing the rodent habitats and get the first infection, and then there is possibility of spreading among others, or they do too much of urbanization and build homes close to the forests, and that because of that the rodents start coming close to the human dwellings, and as a result the disease is very close. So better, it would be nice if we don't disturb their habitats.